I need this.
So I'll tell you who I am in case you are unaware. You probably are, because why would you be? My name is James. I helped co-found a summer camp called Stomping Ground, which is essentially a summer camp based in the ideals of unschooling, where we have kids come in and pretty much do whatever they want as long as they're not killing each other and breaking the law.
Is that in New Jersey?
It's based in New York, so it's near Binghamton, New York. Yep. And a lot of people from this conference have sent their kids to camp. So if you ask around, you can learn more about it. I'll actually be giving a talk tomorrow talking a lot more about, kind of the amazing things we've seen from having this little micro ecosystem of kids just being themselves, hanging out with who they want, when they want, and all the beauty we've seen there and the challenges and struggles we've had as well. But today, what I hope to talk about is something I think I struggle the most with as an unschooling dad. So I mentioned we founded a new camp. I actually met my wife at a summer camp quite a long time ago, and that camp, there's a lot of alumni here who went to that camp with me, Sabrina, Peter, Meredith. But that camp was not a camp grounded in the idea of giving kids freedom. In fact, I wouldn't call it very authoritarian, but certainly, a lot of the, window dressings of authoritarianism, a lot of the strategies had to do with, the philosophy was, well, how do we get the kids who come here to become more like we want them to be, right? How do we get them to do the things we want them to do and go to bed when we want them to go to bed and show up for meals when we want to and so on. And so most of my training, and then fast forward, I was also certified to be a public school teacher. My wife was as well. And most of your training there, again, is back in that same mindset of, we'll be as strict as you can be to start out and then ease up over the course of the time and then they'll appreciate it or something. It's hard to remember all now, but so having all of that so deeply ingrained in me, I think through all my formative years of working with kids, transitioning to a new way of working with kids and trying to think through, this idea of giving kids freedom, but while also having realistic boundaries for me, both for my person, for my time, for my resources, and all these things, has been a big source of struggle for me. So I hope to talk a little bit about some of the things we've tried and what we've done, but also to hear from y'all. I'm sure many of you have thought about this or talked about this or at least wondered sometimes, maybe I'm alone, but at least wondered I'd really like to go outside today, but I can't leave my 3-year-old inside who just wants to stay in today again, like he did yesterday and the day before that and the day before that, right? So that's where we're coming from. So to start off, I think for me there are some really clear boundaries that I'm happy to address and set for my kids, and that's with my person and property. I think I don't mind wrestling with my kids and certainly giving them my things, but I don't struggle as much with, if my kid is hurting me, saying, well, this is my body and I don't choose to use it that way, and I don't really struggle with, standing up for myself in that way. That's not a big struggle I have. And likewise, I don't really struggle on the other end with some of the clear freedom things, giving kids time. We don't have academic expectations at home. We don't have, expectations on when they go to bed necessarily. We're able to kind of work that out. I feel like we're bought in on the unschooling philosophy writ large, but I think, one of the things people don't tell you as much about when you're getting into this is all the little gray areas that come up, where you're like, you want to do one thing, I want to do something else. Who wins, for lack of a better term, right? I mean, we like to be in a win-win frame of mind always when we're working with kids, but sometimes it is hard. I actually talked at a conference a few days ago, and I was talking more about what we've done at camp, and someone stood up and objected and said, and I was relating it, this was mostly to an audience of parents, and I was talking about what we've done at camp and some of the things we've learned from that in terms of giving our kids freedom and partnering with them in life rather than sort of powering over them. And this fellow stood up and just said, I personally think that peaceful parenting is kind of BS, and I think that parents need to have authority. And I thought, okay, I'm not saying that parents shouldn't have any authority in relationships. There are some things that, if my kid is going to hurt someone else physically, I think that I'm going to take authority in that situation and prevent it. In the same way, if Andrea were beating someone else outside, I would try to take authority in the situation and stop her from doing so, But for me, there are a lot of gray areas and there are a lot of struggles with how we get from having a peaceful household where kids are able to function and live freely and study and pursue and engage in all the beauty that they can hopefully find in the world, but also recognizing that we're still people too. Just because we have kids doesn't mean that now, the boundary between being someone's partner and kind of being their servant. I don't want to use inflammatory language, but it can feel that way for me sometimes, if I'm being honest. So that's what I'm hoping to dive into. Well, I put this slide in there twice, so we're going to do the next slide first. So the first one for me that's a tricky one, and I'd like to hear from y'all. When kids are really seemingly hell-bent on doing something that feels really unsafe to you. So I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but so in the camping world, so the hurt but not injured thing, this comes from our philosophy in camp, which I've tried to help other camps adopt, and that we've actually been pretty successful with, but the idea there is that when kids come to camp, we're actually okay with them getting hurt, which is unusual. We're okay with them stubbing their toes and maybe getting hurt emotionally, like making a bad decision or staying up late and being tired the next day and missing out on something they're hoping to do. We're okay with kids making mistakes like that. Like for us, that's totally okay. But what we counsel the staff on is then if they say, oh, but what we're going to do is swim across the lake with no lifeguards, say, no, you're not going to do that, because if that goes wrong, you're not going to stub your toe, you'll be in the lake on the bottom of it, and that's not going to work. So when you're in a situation, if anyone has any phrases or things they try to use, you're in a situation where one of your children is trying to do something that they really want to do, and they're making a strong case for doing it, but you just don't feel comfortable with how safe it is, with the injury level risk. Are there things you guys try, or phrases you throw out there, or ways you bring the conversation that you found to be effective? You can chew on it for a second, and I can jump in too. But yeah, go.
I used to say, be careful, and then all my opposing friends say, don't say that. And I just don't want to say why not.
Yeah, okay. Right, because your instinct is like, in this situation that it's a very unsafe, or it seems like an unsafe behavior, and you want to bring attention to that. Yeah, I think that's hard.
One of mine I kind of bring up is risk versus reward.
Okay.
Like, is it, my kid likes to quad. A week after he was going quadding with friends, I said, well, we're going on a road trip, and we're going to be living on the road for the next years. You got to think about it. If you fall and hit your head or break an arm or something, it is going to come in and affect our future life. So you kind of have to think a little bit about whether the potential injury or potential fallout of a choice you're making and how it's going to affect
Yeah, I like
life
that.
going forward.
So bringing up the idea that an activity, just bringing up the potential risk.
Yeah.
How old is your child?
Almost 14.
Almost
so
14,
he's old enough to kind of think through some of those
Right.
things. But we started it young.
Yeah, so you found, this is
Yeah.
encouraging for me to hear, so you found that by doing these conversations in the long term that it's worked out for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, my twins keep on strapping on the highway.
What's this?
My
Oh,
twins
on,
keep on strapping.
yeah.
And I don't know how to handle it.
Right.
Sometimes they don't scream about it, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And it's just making my life tough so much.
Yeah.
But they don't see any big harm or risk in it, I tell them. But I don't know how to stop it.
Right. Well, this is one of the hardest things for me, like the idea of sort of far off potentially consequences, or things that are, when we think about, when we're analyzing risk, we can think in terms of both possible impact and likelihood, right? So like the likelihood that you get in a car accident in any given drive is very, very small, right? But the impact that would have on your life would be enormous. Right? So something like not wearing a seatbelt, like I personally have never been in a car accident, so I could have never worn a seatbelt for every one of my drives ever, and I would still be here living and breathing, but it only takes once, right? So yeah, those conversations. Does anyone have any feedback or things they try when, for things that have sort of ambiguous benefits or far off or hard to imagine? Safety risks, is there stuff that other people try that they found to be effective? Yeah.
I tell my tween and my teenager that biologically their bones aren't developed yet, and they kind of don't believe me. They think I'm being condescending.
Yeah.
And I said, well, think about your little sister. If I asked her to, sort the laundry, would she be able to do that mentally? And they say no. And I say, is she dumb? Or is she just not mentally ready? Like, is her brain not developed in these areas? Okay. It's the same thing with you. Your brain is not developed to be able to look around corners in life. And so that's why you need to tell me what's going on. I can help you look around that corner, and then you can make a decision for yourself.
Yeah, I think that there's something I like there, which is the idea that, helping kids put into perspective what they might be going through. I read a really great book called Overschooled and Undereducated. I don't know if anyone's ever read this one. It's more obscure, but it was fantastic. It was specifically dealing with research around teenagers and why teenagers seem to want to rebel. And the one particular part of the book I liked the most was talking about what goes on in the teenage brain. And so this author, whose name I forget, but that title will come up on Amazon. But he puts forth that research has shown that essentially teenage brains are, biologically designed to destroy and rebuild like 1 to 3% of their cells every single year, and that they engage in extreme risk-taking behavior from his perspective because it was evolutionarily advantageous. Because like in the old days, people would grow up in these cultures, like they'd be in a cave or wherever, and then the iceberg would be moving south, and they would tell their parents, "Hey, we're going to move. That iceberg's coming," and the parents would say, "We've lived here for years. My grandpappy lived here, and his grandpappy before him. We've always been safe, so we're not going to go anywhere." And they say, "Well, yeah, but we're going to go anyway, though." So then they come in, and then the people who are so averse to risk and change would die off, and then sort of the risk takers or the people that were willing to question their parents, and not just accept all the accepted wisdom, benefited in the long run. Of course, we live in a far less risky, generally, society than basically ever, right? I mean, it's a lot harder to get killed by trauma than it has been basically forever. So I think it's a little tricky to negotiate these teenage brains that have really, really beneficial things. Like questioning your parents, I find to be a really beneficial thing. Except when you're the parent, you really think you have only good things to say. It would really be helpful sometimes not to be questioned. So, but I think it's worthwhile, I talked about that research with teenagers just to help them put into perspective, just what it is going on with them. And I try not to, I don't want to disempower them, right? Like I don't want them to feel like they can't work through these things, but I think being a little bit more self-aware can be really beneficial. And I think that it can be done in a way that's not like an "I told you so" or not a gotcha or a, making them feel like they always need to be checking in before they make any decision. Ideally, I think what we're hoping to do is set boundaries with our own relationships with them so that, like what's the old saying, that my voice will help become part of their inner voice or something, So when they're analyzing the risk of a situation, that they think, I wonder what my dad would do here, instead of thinking like, I hope my dad doesn't yell at me if I do this, So that's my funny.
Just to kind of add to a lot of these ideas, I often will take an approach of talking about my feeling of, I see what you're doing, this is how I'm feeling right now, it's making me feel nervous because of this knowledge that we have that they might not have.
Yeah,
But
sure.
to kind of turn it into expressing my feelings about it and my
Right.
concern. Like I'm not feeling safe, or I'm feeling negative, so it's not turning onto really what they're doing.
Yeah.
In a sense of like sharing the emotion I'm feeling about what's happening.
Yeah, and I think owning, that's really honest, right? To own your own feelings instead of
Yeah.
trying to dictate their behavior.
And then talking about why or the knowledge that I might have as to what they're doing. You might not see it the way I see it.
Right. So when the rubber meets the road, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like if that isn't effective for you and risky behavior continues, do you have something that you do after that?
Well, it depends on the behavior.
Right. Sure. That makes sense.
Like sometimes it's sometimes it's climbing that it's just making me feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but I know like they're good. Sometimes I need to communicate it.
Yeah.
A lot of times it just opens up conversation, and then it
Sure.
helps to calm me down, or it helps us open the conversation where then we're talking about what we're both seeing.
Yeah. This is something we struggle with in our family so much. My wife and I have really different comfort levels with risky behavior, and so trying to navigate, like if we're out in the woods climbing around on rocks, slippery rocks near a waterfall, and I'm there and I'm physically present and I feel safe because I'm, allowing it to continue, but she's down and doesn't feel safe. Like that's such a hard thing to deal with, because like I think ultimately I'm just not even sure, like, and I'll put it forward, I'm not sure whose opinion or desires in that moment should carry more weight, like because we have the child who clearly wants to do it, and then one parent who feels comfortable and one doesn't. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this that have, Do you want to chime in on how you all handle it in your families?
I
Yeah.
move away.
Yeah.
I used to have a tribe, and we would support each other in that way. So we have a small park day, and they'd be climbing tall trees, or the fence that,
Yeah.
conventional Main Street parents are looking them. And even for me, I'm like, that's kind of too high. And I err on the side of almost recklessness. I'm like, very liberal.
Yeah.
Do it. Go ahead.
Right.
scary, like a 20-foot tree, I'll have one of my
Yeah.
tribesmen. You watch that. I can't see it, and you keep an eye, and I'll just.
Yeah. Does that feel okay for you? Like after the fact?
So it was very difficult at first because
Yeah.
means negligent, irresponsible.
Right.
It's going to be hauled up to jail.
Well, that comes up, right? I mean, it comes up to, to say nothing of the externalities and how, getting your kids taken away or something, I mean, which, is not likely, hopefully, but you hear stories, right? But even just the part where, like, because sometimes I worry, like, and I'm the person who can accept a different amount of risk, but, like, if something were to happen, because something could happen, right? Like, there's no guarantees with any of this stuff, right? And then, like, the conversation with after that scares me. We haven't had any big issues there, but it's, bad things can happen. Go ahead.
3 years ago, when my older one was 9 and he's up in the tree with his friends, and he falls down. He has blue and no laceration.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's just great. This is me parenting.
Yeah.
But my tribes, if you have a supportive tribe that are sort of on the same page, they're like, no, that's his story.
Right.
That's his journey. He'll have his scar, and that's his story to tell. Look what I did, and I lived with, and that's his learning process. So, well, maybe next time, and now he knows that, that tree's kind of high for me. I
Sure.
remember what happened.
Yeah.
We got lucky. You're right. We got lucky. It was only a laugh.
Sure. Well,
I'm biting my lip all the time.
no, I hear that. Well, and I think it's interesting too. One of the things I've observed with my kids is, little kid bodies are designed to, essentially only be able to take on the beating that they can put themselves in, right? So like, like little people who do cartwheels and flop around, like, and they fall down, like it doesn't hurt that much, because they're only falling 6 inches or whatever, right? So over time, like they get in this habit of like hurting themselves a little bit and slipping and, tearing their clothes and all these things that actually hurt in the moment and are pretty upsetting for them. But over time, they actually develop, an internal sense of risk assessment or whatever. Versus like, for me, because I think always it's really easy to get caught up in the moment of like something bad could happen here. But as we think about what child development means and what it means to have a sense of self-concept and being able to move through the world, and because for like when I talk to more mainstream parents, I'll say something like, so if your kid gets to college someday or moves out, like you're not going to be there, right? So ultimately, we all need to be thinking in terms of preparing our kids for the first day where they wake up, and you're not allowed yell away, right? That's going to happen to every kid, hopefully, at some point in their life. And if we don't have that day in mind, like I picture when I got to college and the type of risk-taking that was happening there was so much higher stakes than risk-taking like my kids want to do, right? Like my kids want to do some things that are pretty risky from time to time, but like the things I saw in college and behaved in myself were so far and beyond that level of risk that, and there were some really extremely bad consequences that happened too, like starting a family earlier than you hoped to, or getting in a car accident, really bad stuff would happen. Being hospitalized due to have bad decisions and whatever. And I like to think about freedom like driving a car, to where we would never just sit someone in a car, tell them for 18 years about how dangerous cars were and say like, kind of give them the basics of what it's like to drive a car, but never actually sit them in one. And then just say like when they're 18, like here's the keys, have fun, which is what you do with freedom, right? But for me, I love to think about freedom in terms of, well, we're going to work you through it. It's your driver's ed. I'm going to be sitting there and I'm going to have a brake on my side too, in case it really gets hairy. But generally speaking, by the time I think, hopefully our kids are waking up and I'm not in the house with them, that they're thinking, oh, I've been pretty much free before. Like I can accept this a little bit more freedom. And certainly that's what we try to do at camp, give them that next level, that next level, that next level. So then their wheels are in motion. They have momentum around being free. And so, yeah, if they get hurt on my watch, well, that's not ideal, but the types of hurts they can get not on my watch in the future are pretty extreme too. So I try not to ignore those. Yeah.
I also really find it interesting to think about what we consider to be risky and changing so much over time, societally or culturally, from one country to another. And so I feel like I try so much, as so many of us do, to create this environment and try and sit it. But sometimes I try and even step out of the society that I'm in or the age that I'm in and say, like, truly, it's human behavior. Like what is beneficial? It's beneficial for my child to practice taking risks, to find their confidence, find their voice, find their step. But I find that to be really fascinating. And I read somewhere, someone was talking about a tribe where children who were, 5 and under were using these really sharp knives. It was just part of their culture. It's what they did. And just thinking of how, the introduction of knives or scissors can be a really big, risky behavior, but for that particular culture, it was, of course, it's how we operate. And so I guess I was trying to think about the risk as, well, is it just what I've been sort of conditioned to think is really risky, or is it actually really risky?
Well, pulling yourself out and being intentional about stuff like that is so hard because I think we all have so many processes that are going on inside of us that we haven't even taken ownership over. We just think that they're natural and that everyone feels the same way or whatever. But a few things come to mind, like that movie Babies. Did you guys see that?
Well, that's
where the people are
what's
crawling.
interesting about what you're saying, because studies have shown, and there was a really neat study done about oxygen monitors. This company had created these things that you put on the toe to constantly see if there's oxygen, and they were designed for premature babies, for NICU babies. But they figured out a way to make them cheaper, and then they could sell them to the general population. So it's like, now every baby can sleep with this thing on their foot. It's a little booty. And a buzzer will go off in your bedroom if there's no oxygen. And the commercials for it are, my buzzer's gone off 4 times already. Well, children have sleep apnea. If they're sleeping with an adult, they snap themselves out of it. That's what we've evolved to do. But it's an example of how this little device that is a really good device and a very important device for premature NICU babies who don't have the wake-up alarm yet. And it's now marketed to mainstream parenting, and we can all judge each other. Well, I monitor my baby while they're sleeping. Do you do that? Because if you don't do that, that's a risk, and you're doing it wrong. Like, that's not okay. And I think there's so much in the world that we have figured out how to sell, like video monitors. Surveillance. Like, how many of us had video monitors when we were infants? I wrote in a cardboard box in the back. Do you know what I mean? So I think we really, as a society, have to look at what is the real risk, what is the perceived risk, and how do we shame other people who don't keep an eye on their kids the way we think it should be done.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's really hard too because like my struggle when I've gone and talked to other camps about what we've done is it's so hard to be on the side of advocating more risk, right? Because someone can always raise their hand and say, well, some percentage of people this thing could happen. You're like, you don't want to say like, well, that's okay to me, because like I don't want everyone to get hurt or like to have sudden infant death syndrome or something like that. I'm not a fan of that. But on the same token, I think we can also, it's not a binary, right? It's not like because I'm against this, I'm for this, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, I think that's spot on.
Exactly.
Cool. So now we're in the situation where the kid, so as we're progressing through, we've had our conversation with the kid, we're still concerned about some sort of risky behavior. Risky behavior persists, right? So this is something I want answers on, because my default in this situation is I don't think is good. So I'm going to throw this out. So risky behavior persists. Let's say it's throwing a ball in a kitchen with a boiling pot of water. This is something that happens in our family. It's happened before. It doesn't happen every week, right? But sometimes I'm cooking, making pasta, and the ball plane moves into the kitchen area, and I say, hey, okay, and I'm trying to get everyone's attention. Attention isn't there. In moments like that, I'll just say it. I will take the ball away, or physically intervene, or especially if it's like wrestling and people are really in the moment and voices aren't interfering with whatever's happening. In moments like that, I will physically intervene because I am worried about injury or lifelong disfigurement or something. It doesn't always feel good though, and I know I'm in a heightened emotional state when it's happening, and I don't want to be that person. But does anyone have any really good things that they do, or any better answers for the group?
We just have a household rule or an agreement.
Yeah.
And we look at it as an agreement that we all agree that it's not some kind of balls in the kitchen. So
Yeah.
that's just our agreement to do a nice job.
And you're able to cut it off before it gets to the point where we do in our family. I think sometimes probably what I sometimes tell our counselors too is a lot of times when it's escalated to the point where something is actually unsafe, chances are good that your planning before that wasn't as good as it needed to be. So that's probably what happens in my family too. I'll own that. Probably if I just had no balls downstairs, for instance, they wouldn't make their way into the kitchen. That's a fair observation. Yeah.
Although I think I am a fan of maybe definitely a fan of creating guidelines, but almost as a result of something as it's coming up, only because I like the idea of having a couple loose guidelines, but then not guidelines for all possible hypotheticals. You know, and not that I'm saying we necessarily do, but just because I feel like sometimes, I don't know, it's easy to kind of think through all the things
Yeah.
that could be necessary boundaries, but we might not ever experience a bunch of them.
Right.
So,
Well, and I'm also personally, I'm at my worst when I'm in that most stressed situation. Like, I find that's the time I'm most likely to default, for instance, like what my parents did, or just like something that just comes out of nowhere. I'm like, whoa, I need to own that I was just really scared, and I was really, you know, feeling in a heightened emotional state. Like I know, like bullying type behavior brings that out of me for sure, you know. For whatever reason, when I see a kid picking on another kid, it's really hard for me to be like, okay, you know, I'm gonna go be so peaceful about this. I just don't like it, you know. So being prepared really helps. Yeah, go ahead.
Something we'll use this as a fun scenario.
Hmm.
So if the wrestling gets out of hand and the bullying,
Yeah, yeah.
like, we'll ask the child,
Hmm.
being more, I guess, subjugated, is this fun for you anymore? And then they have a chance to reflect. And sometimes they'll say yes, or keep on going.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll actually be aware of, no, it's not fun.
Yeah, well, and then I think sometimes that actually can, I mean, certainly when there's conflict between kids, I find that an approach like that really works, because a lot of times the person who's, you know, kind of the aggressor or whatever doesn't even realize that the other person, maybe they're not picking up on the signals, maybe the signals aren't clear. Like, we have a safe word in our house about wrestling and fighting, because the kids like to play really rough, and they even like to play where one says like, help, 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 you know? And so I'm like, what's going on, you know? And they're like, no, the duck was asking for help, you know? So it's just a toy. He's not actually in pain. I'm like, all right, get back downstairs. So, yeah, just like an arbitrary word that they can say to each other to acknowledge, like, oh, now this isn't me messing around, you know? Because kids, like, they're not as developed in terms of picking up on social cues. So even to an outsider, like, I have to help my counselors through this all the time too, but it looks so obviously like one person isn't enjoying it, but the kid actually doesn't have any bad intentions. They just have no idea. So yeah, that can be really helpful. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, in your camp, do you guys have like a safe word system or something that's grabbing attention when you get like wrestling?
No, we haven't used it at camp. We'd only use it at home. Although it might be, you know, it's interesting. When kids are not as comfortable with one another, they tend to tread a lot more lightly. It's like an observation I made where I think sometimes family members take the most liberties with one another, both in terms of how they talk to one another and how they physically interact, a lot more so than kids that have only known each other for a week or two. But certainly we do, with some frequency, have to guide kids through, you know, discussions like that, particularly kids that are not as up on social cues and things. But we try to lay all that groundwork in the beginning of the week too, and a lot of times at camp we don't facilitate as much, like especially rough play, just because it's so much harder to, especially when you don't know the kid as well. Like when it's your own kid, you have a much better sense of what's going on than it's two kids that are just come up and you don't know them. So, yeah. Cool. Any other stuff on safety, physicalness? Okay. So I have more gray areas. So this is another tricky one for me, which is the discussion around things that we force our kids to do. If there are any things you force your kids to do that you feel a high degree of confidence are objectively better, right, than not. So like for me, I'm strongly of the opinion that brushing your teeth is a better idea than not brushing your teeth. That's something I really believe that firmly. I'm strongly convicted that my 4-year-old, when he's 24, will not look at me and say, I really resent you for making me brush my teeth. I really wish I could have never brushed my teeth once in my whole life. But basically every night, he does not want to brush his teeth, right? So like, this is something I know comes up in unschooling circles. You can extrapolate this for all sorts of things, right? I mean, I think, you know, if you polled unschooling families, you would get a wide range of opinions on things like, you know, nutrition or teeth brushing or like screen time, you know. There are all sorts of different ones of these gray areas where essentially our reasoning when we're trying to explain to the child is, you'll thank me for this someday, I hope, you know. So I'd love to hear, I mean, if people are comfortable sharing, like, you know, if there are hot button issues in your family where there are hard discussions around limitations you have, or if you just are of the opinion that no limitations are better. You know, this is something that definitely comes up in our family as a point of difficulty, so you can help me if you have any good ideas. Yeah, did you want to say something?
Or trust or teeth brushing. My son's grown up with me as a single mom, quite low income, so as long as I'm paying for it, they have to maintain a little level of help because I'm gonna be one putting hundreds of dollars into whatever cavity filling and that
So you're
sort
his
of
healthcare,
thing.
basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
so like, if you want me to pay for it, then we have to have some sort of agreement
Yeah.
that we're going to be respectful and kind of care for it.
Interesting. Okay, I like that. Yeah, what were you thinking?
Just wanted to say, I don't know, as a parent, I really remember my childhood very well.
Mm.
And just want to say, I do not believe in that you'll thank me for that one day.
You don't like that on any level?
On any level.
Really?
I really don't think they'll ever thank us for anything.
Oh, I
If
think,
there's anything they'll thank us for, it's our love. Not the,
yeah.
not this,
Well,
parts of time to live in. Yes, there are things that I want them to do, and I think are very important for her. I'll try to say from a very loving place.
yeah, of course.
She doesn't come across.
Yeah, I really admire your courage, I think, on that, because I know for me, like, I just wind up coming from a place of fear with things like, I guess when I think about, you know, I think about some things as bells that can't be unrun, right? So like, I don't know, playing in toxic waste or something, right? Just to use an absurd example, like something that may not seem so bad in the moment, but I can say like, this is definitely going to be terrible, even a week from now, right? And I'm not sure that, you know, again, people can have different convictions about things than others, and maybe like, it's really not that big a deal to get cavities in your baby teeth, and I'm just uptight or something, right? That could definitely be the case, and I'm willing to own that. But I think that I think that a parent can reasonably assess the situation and say like, this feels, at this point, I know this child can't comprehend the ramifications of the long-term, you know, decision here. And again, I know these are excuses people make for all sorts of things, so I'm recognizing that I'm just on a certain place on a spectrum here. And it sounds like for you guys, it just works to have a.
It's not that we don't have the hard stuff, it's just that I do not believe in the saying.
Oh, I don't like the saying either. That's why it's in quotes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Right.
it worked for me the way I wanted it to.
Sure. Well, and that's why, you know, and I hate the whole idea of you'll thank me for this someday. Obviously, like was a huge struggle in my family growing up with my parents, and it was all around the stuff that I don't like now, right? Like academic expectations or how much I played video games and stuff. And I know a lot that those restrictions strongly influenced how I view the world and view my own kids now.
Helped me best in the series of ground
Was what? I'm sorry.
series of ground.
Mm.
Reading her books all the time, and all the little places where I was too were like,
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad. That sounds really great because I'm not quite there yet, I don't think.
did you read the book?
No, I haven't.
You have to read the book?
Maybe I should.
Teresa Kernberg.
Yes.
What's the name of the book? Parenting for Change. Yes.
Oh, Parenting for Social Change.
It's the first book in my life that I read, and I remember all the books that I read and I was an adult or a young adult,
Yeah.
thinking of my parents.
Sure.
Over and over, baby says, no, did that, and I was like,
Mm.
And then I became a parent and I said, oh, I'll be better than that. Reading this book is the first time I was like, why do I do here the same thing?
Well, I'll pick up a copy. I'll pick up a copy for sure. So I'd love to hear from other people too. Like, if there are areas in your life where you find yourself in this frame of mind, where you know it feels very strongly like you want to, you know, change behavior or restrict certain things, or you know, impose certain things like teeth brushing or whatever it is you have. Are there people that struggle with this or have strategies or conversations? Yeah, Andrew. Go.
I found that sometimes I just ask myself why I'm so caught up with something, whether it's toothbrushing or whatever. If I can challenge myself to see how long it takes me to let it go,
Right.
just not say anything about it
Interesting.
for a while, but a lot of times it comes back around to where they just, oh, well, other people in the house do brush their teeth, and they provided me with a toothbrush. I'm going to try it every couple days, and then maybe every day when you're brushing your teeth, once a day.
Yeah.
And that letting it go kind of helps it come back around to where it's not a thing. It's not a challenge.
Yeah. Well, I think things becoming emotionally charged is definitely a huge deal.
It escalates the whole argument when you know you're right.
Yeah. Well, and I also totally empathize with. I think kids really have a fundamental need for autonomy, and so like, you know, I've noticed from having worked with parents on a really authoritarian level to a very, you know, permissive or, you know, freedom-loving lifestyle, or however you want to say, that kids will challenge whatever boundaries you put for them, even if they're way more lax than your friends and saying stuff like, you should know what other parents do to their kids. It doesn't help, it doesn't do anything. So I think kids' needs for autonomy and to feel like they're owning whatever the decision is really, really valuable. And again, like, it's funny because I know things I'm hung up on, like toothbrushing or whatever. I know that for me, no one forces me to brush my teeth. And it's not because my parents always forced me to, it's because I just think it's a good idea. And like, I probably should just trust that my kids will think it's a good idea, because most people do, right? But I still just struggle with it, I don't know, with those small things. Anyone else want to weigh in on things they do in their family, or anything that's a struggle, or to, you know, come to the group for something that's a struggle with you?
Chores.
Chores? Okay, well that's an interesting one, right? So I'd love to hear people's take on the idea. So like in my family, like I pay for everything pretty much, right? So like, given that I buy the house and buy the food and all the stuff, like, then there are dirty things all over the house. So how do you handle the idea of pitching in around the house in your family, if you ask for it at all? Any thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I think it shouldn't be a transactional thing.
Mm.
So that you pay for it, that is you.
Right.
You pay for it. You live in a house where you have kids or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
That I don't, it shouldn't come. I wouldn't bring that in
Sure.
at all. And I think when they're younger, it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And as you model across the house, you know, if your kids are available to help, when they get older, they start, bringing they want to participate.
Right.
But it's because in the same way they take self-care and they care about the space around them, which is generally their computer table, whatever, and it gets larger than their bedrooms, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that one, I just think it's, that chores are the one space which is a space that has potential for breaking that connection between
Yeah.
parent and child. And really, you know, dirty plates, connected children.
Well, I think that's a good point. If you didn't catch any of that, I think it's an interesting observation that probably doesn't help foster connection when you make it transactional, right? Like the pointing out what I've done and expect, you know, now you have to do something for me kind of thing. And I really resonate with that. And I think put in the perspective of dirty plates, a better connection, it's a pretty easy choice. I know that sometimes, and it's something, you know, I have in a later slide, but something a concern you'll hear from the world writ large is the idea of spoiling someone, right? And what that looks like. And that's a term I hate and don't use, but it's something that I've been approached with, especially, again, speaking about this to broader, you know, less friendly audiences. And so, and I'll put out to the group about if other people have any concerns about the idea of, I'm with you, connection more important than dirty plates for sure. As we're also building habits and going through life, like, there is a part of me that sometimes gets nagged at, and by the way, I don't force my kids to do chores, so this isn't like, hopefully I'm not coming across as defensive, but I do wonder sometimes as I'm like cleaning up, you know, apple cores that are behind the bed, or like a piece of a hot dog that's like somewhere, you know, and I'm like, I really wish I didn't have to do this, you know, and I wish that whoever put this here, I wish it occurred to them at this age to be more thoughtful about the house, right? And you can have those conversations and go down that path, but I know that it still triggers me on some level to, you know, and I don't think I like feel disrespected or something, but I'm like, it didn't occur to this person at all to clean up.
What
you know.
age?
What's that?
What age?
She's 6 years old.
They still live so in the present.
No, I know, and I get it, right? But I think that it's, you know, I do think it's reasonable to wonder, like, if habits that you develop when you're young, like, I think it's reasonable to have a fear of like those continue to perpetuate, right? I mean, does this occur to anyone else at any point? Yeah, go ahead.
So I was forced to do chores. In a Latin American household, culturally,
Yeah.
machista, at least in my house,
Mm-hmm.
little girls would clean. And I hate it.
Yeah.
And I love it. And I felt that. So now, I'm my mother. So I battle between forcing my boys to learn to become independent and self-sufficient, but at the same time, developmentally, don't give a rat's
Yeah.
booty about the apple course. It's not,
Yeah.
and I have to, you're right, I struggle with that very much and understanding it. And I do feel underappreciated and not validated. And that's just something I
Sure.
have to work with. But
Well, it's interesting when you point out the gender thing. So, like, I'll say that, you know, having been friends with a lot of males throughout my lifetime, I've observed some percentage of them then be in relationships and not be accustomed to helping clean up, or pitch in, or do things like that around the house, based on how they were raised, you know. And I've observed that be a struggle for them to adjust later in life. And I'll count myself in this category, by the way. I was never expected to clean up or do anything around the house growing up, and that's no longer the expectation in my relationship, that I don't do anything. And I'm not that I ever resented it or anything, but I was so like, it was like, well, you just put your plates on the counter, and then they're clean again at some point. You know? And I don't think I ever like really worked through, like my mom would joke like, oh, the cleaning fairy came through or whatever, and she just took care of us and was really loving and whatever, and like I clean up and do the same thing for my kids now, but like I have observed in situations where people, you know, are given freedom or taken care of in some ways, and then it just doesn't occur to them to pitch in later in life. Like, oh, again, count myself in that category, and now I pitch in, so maybe I turned out okay or whatever. But I don't know. I guess I think it's worthwhile and okay to talk about what happens and have everyone at least in the house know who's cleaning up, you know. And even if you're not forcing anyone to like be like, oh, I'll clean up, you know, or like if someone wants to come and play or do whatever, say like, oh, you know, well, we just ate and look at all this big mess in the kitchen, I need to clean it up. So that's what we wind up doing. Like, we actually don't have a boundary around forcing kids to clean up even after themselves, even though sometimes I want to, because I do think it's like, for them there is a natural there's a natural result of a dirty house, which is that people who they really like spending time with, us, are busy. So sometimes they pitch in, and I was hoping to hear from old schooler parents than me that it turns out good, where they all want to chip in. So that's not our life yet, but yeah, go ahead.
So I think one really interesting thing is being able to do that without guilt and shame. And so what happens often is my husband will come home from work and he makes dinner. I do not cook. I don't cook. So
Yeah.
he comes home from a long day of work and he's got to cook his dinner.
Yeah.
But then after dinner, like my son will want to go out and play baseball with dad, and dad can't because there's this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I really have had to talk to my husband about not using sort of that phrase of I can't right now because nobody's helping me do this or whatever. And one thing that we've done in our house, we've had so much discussion about this. Apple cores on the couch drive me insane.
Yeah.
They're there. So we've had a lot of discussion about this and how we all have to sort of take care of this space as a family and whatever. And kind of what we've landed on is that in the morning, my husband and I will kind of figure out which rooms need the most work right now. You know, so the living room needs to be vacuumed, the stairs need to be swept, whatever. And we'll put some chores up, and the big kids pick two, and the little kids pick one, and it all gets done. And nothing's really forced in the sense that I'm not standing over them, harping on them to do chores. But it's just kind of what we've decided on. I mean, the whole time they're doing chores, I'm doing chores, you know, do laundry or dishes or whatever. But I think the key part of it is the dialogue and the connection and not allowing guilt and shame of, you know, I provided this home for you, I provided this meal for you, I provided that. I think that can't be a part of it. And it's okay to sort of talk to your children about being part of a bigger thing, a family, but that you have to be able to do it without putting on the guilt and the shame of I'm doing my part and you're not doing your part. And
Yeah, I
so
really
that's
like
sort of where we've landed.
Let's go here and then Julie. There you go.
Yeah, I'm not good at that at all. I have that inner conflict of all the guilt and shame that I was faced with.
Yes.
Hop in there and try to
Great.
battle with. But I will share some good ideas that I know that my husband has done and that other friends have done. One is that sometimes when my husband has the presence of mind and the energy and the rest and the patience and the wherewithal, is he'll make it a game. Like, oh my God, there was a tornado! Quick, we gotta get mommy to get this, and you know, it's
Yeah,
a
it's awesome.
room or something. And it's really fun when they get into it, and it makes quick work of it. first of all, he doesn't make them, do chores. We just make sure they see them doing chores. They invite them to participate, and like eventually, but also along the same idea of making it a game of like, how much garbage can you carry? Look how muscles are so strong, and then it becomes this, natural competition, fun, kind of playful thing.
Yeah, well, that's, I think,
We're challenged.
making it a matter of perspective is an interesting one too, because I'll often just like kind of sit back and observe in my family how all 5 of us can be in a room and be interpreting the situation completely differently, right? Because like maybe mess isn't objectively bad, it just affects me more than it affects someone else. And maybe like some messes, like pizza face down on a rug, is worse than others, like Duplo scattered around, right? And so yeah, I think putting in perspective, it's always interesting to see that you can make fun of. Yeah.
That's the thing I have a hard time with. I want it done.
Yeah, right on.
And I want to sit back and not do it when I want them to.
Yeah.
It's a sort of tug of war.
Yeah. That's great.
And I do, fall into that thing of calling it a mess when it's their like creative, thing, and I have to remind.
Yeah, that's a powerful observation too. Yeah, Julie, go.
Oh, I was gonna say, what you were talking about, Amy, that what I found with my 16-year-old is that we never had required chores or anything like that, but certainly they pitched in, and it was often on their own initiative because I asked, and I could really use your help if you're free. And what I find out with my 16-year-old is he really feels pride in what he is willing to do.
Yeah, right.
And that's such a great internal motivation because he didn't have to do it over the years because I said he should. Or all my reasons, I don't like apple cores on the couch. I don't like finding food behind your bed. I have an issue about food in the bed. And now when they still, they'll forget. They're like, ooh. But the fact that they really do start to take responsibility, ownership, of taking care of the house with me and with my husband, rather than you'll do it because, this group is paid for. And so I have moments where something like that, but mostly it's that they've been asked to help because, they want to take care of our house. And now I can see that it has rubbed off, and I'm like, oh, because I was not sure.
Yeah, well, isn't it interesting? I mean, one of the things that we talk about all the time at camp is just the idea of consent and how powerful consent is, obviously. And I think most people are aware of how important consent is in a lot of key areas in life. But when it comes to working with kids, like the difference between how something feels when it's consensual or, a decision made on, we're talking about a consensus on the family on how chores get done. We found that even very young children are super capable of forming consensus and then when you're referring back to a consensual agreement between everybody, especially if there is like where I'm going to invest my thing and then you're going to invest your thing and that's how we'll accomplish this, that even very young children are capable of understanding that and they kind of get it and they can also relate to the feeling of someone not, agreeing, keeping up with their end of the bargain or whatever. But I remember really specifically growing up, and I can't believe it stuck with me, but I was at my dinner table and my mom said she had talked to a friend of hers, a family friend, and she said, yeah, Judy said when you were over there the other night, you did all the dishes because I was hanging out with their friends. And I was like, yeah, and I was feeling pretty proud and they were so thankful and it felt so good to do the dishes at this house just to and I can't remember why I was trying to impress the girl who was there. And but I did, and I felt so good. They were so grateful, and it was a surprise, and it was like, well, thank you for helping, and it just felt so great. And then my mom was bringing it up, and I was like feeling really proud. She said, but you never do the dishes around here. And I was like, no, I guess I don't. But she was like, I don't know why you would go and do the dishes there. And she was like taking it personally that I had done the dishes for someone else, but not at our house or something. But it was like, again, back to that consent thing, like talk about two totally different feelings when something's an obligation versus when something is done from a place of joy or generosity. And so I think that's really powerful for me, actually, like fostering an environment where people can come from a place of generosity and have good feelings associated with helping probably might be the more important thing than dirty plates. So I really value that. Thanks for chiming in. Cool. Any other thoughts on this?
I always just ask for help. And if he's busy, if he says, no, I'm playing a game, or, okay, no problem, I'll go do it. So then the times that he is able, he's quick to jump and wants to help because I haven't forced him to do so previously.
Yeah, asking. Love it. And I'll go here. I saw your hand.
Yeah,
guess in our house, I have a hard time with visual clutter.
Yeah.
You know, closet doors closed, like a closet's piled high, so I don't think I'm okay with that.
Sure.
So, 3 years into parenting, we decided to have a playroom.
Mm.
And mentally, I'm okay with a mess in the playroom. And so my son agrees to keep Lego and chaos confined into this
Sure.
area and the rest of the house. When I ask him to clean it up, he knows mommy doesn't like stepping on Lego and mess.
Mhm.
And that's an agreement. So it's worked out well. It's saved his life many times.
Yeah, consensual contraction. That's good.
I do also want to say, and I'll talk about this a little bit, I haven't talked there, but it's important to also understand when you're hearing ideas from different people that there's a big difference between it's just you and your son
Absolutely,
older,
yeah.
and like we're a family of 6, and I
Yeah.
have another friend who's got 7 children. It's like it's a spectrum, you know, and so you're saying I'll just ask my son for help, like that's awesome.
We had a chore chart, and there was 5 of us, so like that's the
Yeah.
whole works for our
But
family.
there's like such this medium between, or this
Mm.
spectrum between, you know, large families and small families, and you know, I never go with like chore chart and putting stickers on.
That was my mom's genius.
I'm not into that, but as far as building consensus and
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff, like there's a spectrum.
Well, totally. And like in our family, we're both at home, right? So it's makes much more
Yeah.
sense to me to come down at lunch and then pick up at lunch versus like
Right.
when my wife used to work, leave at 5:30 and come back at 6. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all really Go ahead.
Actually, one of the things about chores for me that I'm struggling is my daughter is 4 and a half, and it's one of those things that I don't require her to do chores, but you know I have to clean up the house. The house should be clean, and I start doing it, and then I ask her, "Do you like the house?" And she says, "No." But 5 minutes later, "Mommy, come play with me," and I'm like, "I can't. This has to be finished before we do X, Y, Z." And then everything melts down. And even if I suggest that, if you help me and finish sooner, nope, I'm not. And it's like, but if you want to play, like, then, okay, so I don't know, maybe it's the words I'm using, or I'm just, I mean, she's pretty young. But it's just like, I wonder at what age will we get to that level where she gets to the point that if you help me, we'll finish faster and then we can play. You
But
know?
it's not the words you're using, it's the age of your child.
Mhm.
Like you still have ways to
Okay, so because then there's my mom yapping at me, but
Right.
when you were here, you were already doing that.
And it's totally fine to like find someone that she can help with and express that that's a really big help. My 4-year-old, for some reason, loves to sweep the stairs. She thinks pulling the dirt off the stair into the dustpan, or her favorite is to like scoop it up next there and then scoop it off the bottom. She loves that, you know. So it's like I don't need the stairs swept every day, but that's her favorite chore. She loves to do it, so I encourage sweep the stairs, have that, you know. So I think that that's a part of it, but understanding that whatever the issue isn't your child, the issue is your expectation. You know, you're saying to yourself, I have to do these dishes. Well, you don't. You can eat off paper plates every day, honestly, and then there would be no dishes. So you have to acknowledge that you're making a choice. And it's okay to make that choice. Most of us, I would say, have made that choice, that we'd rather wash dishes than eat off paper plates every day. But acknowledging to yourself that that's a choice that we've made, and that that's okay. And if you can kind of switch that mindset, switch those expectations, it's easier to interact. Because now it's not about me and my chores and you're not doing anything and you're a freeloader. It's about,
Yeah.
I know,
you know, right?
It's definitely not.
And I
So
think
it's, a lot of it is your own mindset, which is
Sometimes I let them pile up for a day or two.
yeah.
I think too, like coming from a place of helping your kids find things that they're competent at can really help. Like that's a great point. Where I think in many cases kids are quite terrible at chores because they're not intrinsically motivated to get good at them. And so when they're in the moment of like even to clean up their own mess, like they spilled 1,000 little beads on the ground or whatever, and you're like, and they've got like the one and they put it in and they're like, I'm just never going to see this through the end. And like you're like, well, you made the mess. I would rather not be cleaning up. You know, in the mind you start going through that. But I do think that, you know, understanding how frustrating it is when you're not very good at something and you're trying to do it, like in that moment, I think I finally have overcome the idea of like, and you were also not being careful with that bowl of beads.
Right.
Like, you know, it's not like you occasionally, you know, you didn't accidentally bump it. You were like kind of juggling, and now there's beads all over the floor. But it's like I could also clean the beads up in 40 seconds because I know how to use a dustpan. And so it's like, okay, I'm just going to help clean up the beads because I don't need them to be, just feeling 2 inches tall because like they're going to be here for 6 hours cleaning up beads.
And it also just occurs to me how much you can learn about letting go, how easy it is for them to let something go.
Yeah.
They're quite good at that, right? The idea of impermanence.
For us, the good thing of having an international family is we had always this idea of going to Mexico one day. We were in Spain, and when I realized how much work it was to, I said, okay, Mexico, we can have hair, but now 3 days a week there is a woman coming and doing, so you come to Mexico and it's easy.
I love it. Cool.
Do you think though that by helping, in that instance, you were showing them that you're willing to help them and you need help?
Exactly, yeah. Well, this is.
I had the exact same problem. My son now help, and I'll be honest, only in the last couple of weeks is he actually pitching in for anything at home, and we have more than just apple cores. I mean, it's everywhere, right? It's tucking, it's all these things that were driving us crazy, and only now. But and I think you have to also be willing, if you're asking a child to do a chore or whatever the task is, that it may not be done to your expectation. Because you have to be accepting
that's right.
of that. Right? And I think really all we want is helping each other in our family. Right?
Yeah, well, I think an interesting, there's an interesting interplay between the idea of, I think having expectations for your child is totally reasonable, and even like in our family, like I try to have we try to go through the mindset of if this were an adult I were talking to, what standard would I uld myself to, right? So like, again, like if my wife knocked something over and made a big mess all over the floor, I wouldn't stand there and stare at her and make her clean it all up, right? That would be quite insane behavior. And so if I'm going to do that to my child, like at that point, that's definitely a power over mentality, right? The idea that, I'm going to force you because I need you to learn a lesson, right? And I think like the more we've gotten out of that mentality, it's something that, this is a recent come to God for me, because that's not how I approach things even probably 6 months ago, but I realized that in that particular instance, it's just kind of condescending of me to put him through something that I wouldn't put an adult through, And I think we're quite good at analyzing situations like this in other boundaries in our lives, like, we don't give people countdowns anymore, I don't tell someone to use like an inside voice without any justification, and I'm still struggling to, because then you just get into habits. Like we allow these behaviors to creep into our interactions with kids that we don't even realize. You don't even realize that you would never say that to an adult until you really and this came from, I had to teach my counselors to do this because they're 17, they get treated badly all year long, then they come work for me at camp, and their habit is to try a little bit better with the kids, but when push comes to shove, you'll hear them say something like, look me in the eye when you're talking to me, or something like, whoa, no. I'm never going to say that again. Don't say that at camp, please. But yeah, so that's, anyway, that was a really helpful thing for me to start asking myself, if I were talking to my wife about this, what would I say? And that brought so much more respect into our discussions. Yeah.
And also then, after this thinking about how to talk, respectfully, etc., I realized how much guilt I always felt at home with my mom, having all this idea that you have the whole day creating a good meal and the whole day cooking when I don't like to cook at all.
Yeah.
And now I don't feel so guilty saying no, just like for me like the meal, like raw vegetables is enough for me, it's okay, I don't need all that. And this guilt is really like something that you don't like to go at her place because you will feel bad about all the things you have to do there,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is hard. I mean, I think it sort of brings me to the other thing I was going to talk about, or bring up to the group too, was the whole idea of, times, so if we're holding ourselves to the standard of how would I, want to treat my wife in this situation and how would I interact with them, sometimes I do struggle with how I'm treated in response, right? Like, there have only been a small handful of people that have ever hit me in my life, for instance, and like 2 of them I call my kids, so like that's really strange, right? Like most people don't hit me, and these people have, right? And so it's like, okay, I really don't want to be hit when you're frustrated, and like, so now what do I do about it, right? Because I think on some level, like I want to be understanding, and obviously like we're talking about things that are developmentally appropriate. I think it's probably very developmentally appropriate to go through a stage where you hit someone when you're frustrated. And as we like look around, like very uncommon to run into 30-year-olds who struggle with this, right? So like I have trust that someday my boys won't hit people when they're frustrated. I really do. But like in the moment when, and it can be something like that, or it can be like being screamed at, you know, like someone just screams at you because, I mean, toddlers or whatever will scream at you for completely arbitrary reasons. I was hanging out with my friend the other day, and his kid was just so mad that they didn't live across the street. You know, that was it. He just wished they lived across the street. No, he was just yelling at the guy. So like, yeah, I'm not even talking about toddlers, but, you know.
Toddlers, my 13-year-old does that.
Right. So in situations like that, I mean, when you're interacting with someone and you're thinking, well, I'm going to talk to you and kind of, you know, envision how this relationship would work if you were a grown-up, and I'm going to talk to you and treat you with that level of respect, and then you totally fly off the rails and do something I would, you know, like if anyone here hits me, there's no second chance. I'm not going to keep hanging out with you, so don't hit me. All right? But in that case, like my love really is unconditional, right? For my kids, and I'm going to love them no matter what, and I want them to treat me like a person. So when does anyone have things that they've worked with or things you try? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a situation like that, and it was not good. After the situation, I felt really bad about how I handled it.
Yeah.
And what occurred to me is that when you're going through the situation, if you haven't thought about it before, you default to whatever it is that you default to, whatever you.
Yeah.
It's almost like a raw instinct.
Primal, yeah, right.
So what I realized is I need to think about that situation before it happens, so I know. It's kind of like, you know, athletes. They practice
Yeah.
here for one game. That's the Super Bowl or whatever.
Right, right.
And so when they're playing, it's instinct. They know what to do because they practice.
Love it, yeah.
So I did it every day.
So by thinking about the situation before it happens and how you handle it, I found that it helped me kind of, you know, understand the kids going through the situations. He has this emotional beings, and they just, it is what it is. Like they're going to scream, kick, whatever it is, and you have to remain calm and try and help them through that situation.
What are your strategies for remaining calm in a situation like that? Do you find that the preparation gets you there, or?
The way that I handle it is just by recognizing that he's emotional. You know, I took this process, the Hoffman process. I don't know if you know what it is.
No.
But it helped me understand because it took me through my childhood and how my parents affected the way that I react to things.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me understand that we all have emotional children in us that have never grown up. And so when we're in situations like that, you just kind of, you go to default to whatever.
Just let loose. I've been there. Yeah, I have that feeling for sure.
So I'm more of a calm person. I've learned to just be calm about it.
Even when it's hard.
I can't explain how I do it.
No, that's not, but I think that's really helpful. I think just the preparation piece gets me. Did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yes, so we have a pretty difficult situation. So we've been working through some of these issues. Clearly, what other people are saying, answering anger with anger doesn't work.
Right.
It escalates the situation. It's extremely difficult to be calm when you're facing anger. But one of the things we've learned from some professionals is reflect back.
Yeah.
So if your child is yelling about something, say, oh, you're very angry about this or that. Just get back to them in a calm way.
Yeah.
That they're giving to you, rather than engaging and saying, oh, why are you angry? You shouldn't be angry. Rationally thinking, there's no reason why you should be angry. And then it just escalates this argument.
Yeah.
So you have to not engage on that level because you're not going to win.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. It's almost like I planted you there to say that, David, because the thing we wound up doing at our summer camp is actually it's called RRV, or reflect and reframe and validate, right? So the idea is reflection. It's a lot like we were saying. Like also, it's just to help someone feel understood, right? So if they say something like, you know, and we used to do this at camp, but they'd say something like, "Oh, James hit me," and you're like, "Oh, it sounds like you're really upset because James hit you," you know. And then you give them the opportunity to feel heard, because then you could say, yeah, I'm upset because James hit me, or you can say like, you could run in and say, Andrea's a thief, and you're like, it sounds like you're really upset because Andrea took something from you, you know? And she's like, well, no, it's because, you know, she stole my idea in this thing. And then it gives them an opportunity for greater clarity, you know? And then so the reflection is just helping them feel understood. And then reframing is kind of a way of helping them to put into perspective their big feelings, but maybe in a little bit of a less of a loaded way. So you say like, Andrea is a thief, and then you might say, sounds like you're really frustrated she took something from you. Both of those things they're the same. They have the same factual observation, but one is calling Andrea a thief and has a heightened emotional state, and one is just an objective observation of what's happened, right? And then the last one is validating. That sounds really hard, you know? Sounds like that was really upsetting. They're like, yeah, it was. Andrea took this thing. But then you can help them work through the process without, you know, like a lot of times if there's conflict between siblings in particular, you don't want to take sides. Like with us, it's campers, right? Or siblings in our house. But you don't want to say like, yeah, Andrea's the worst. Man, I can't believe she did that. Andrea's not the worst. And she would never steal anything from you either. I know that much about her. Sorry, if I know your name and you're in the audience, then I have to use it. But yeah, so, you know, helping the people, to feel understood, because sometimes they'll clarify, but then to help them, you know, put things in a context in a way that allows them to, you know, remove a little bit and just try to, again, work through actually what happened, and then validating them, like, it's totally fine to feel this way, like, I'm not, you know, you hit me, you're so angry with me right now, and maybe I don't want to be hit ever, but when you start with the reflect, reflame, and validate, you're at least starting the next part, which is how you need to be treated without, you know, making it all about you right from the get-go, right? So like, the kid is super angry, you get hit, well now you're super angry, so what do? You just want to talk about what you're angry about, and you never even get to the stuff that they were angry about in the first place. So yeah.
And I love thinking about the role on the back end as much as on the front end, because in reflection I realized a lot of times where my daughter has acted out in terms of hitting me, when I am reacting immediately like my parents, or like I grew up and wishing I had done what you're talking about. But when I take a step back and reflect, I realized that I was actually a huge role in what was inflaming her in the first place. And that it was maybe because of some restriction that I imposed that felt really important in my mind and also really urgent, and so it constantly makes me kind of step back and say, whenever I feel sort of this urgency rising up in me, like, is what I'm thinking about really urgent? Is this boundary that I want to place, is it really important? Is it really important that I resolve it right now? And you know, and I think that I wind up doing more of an internal conversation as a reflection whenever she's acting out, because I think it's more she's responding to the environment around her. And that's not just coming out of nowhere. And when it's just the two of us, then that's probably stemmed from something that I've done. So I try and it's really hard. But
it can be really hard to take ownership when your kid's in a heightened emotional state and kind of say like, think about your own role in it. And it's always, I think it's a really default behavior in conflict to think about who's the most wrong, you know? So like, you see this between adults all the time, where it's like, you did this, well you did this. You're like, okay, I did that, and I want to talk about this thing that I'm upset about or whatever. And it's obviously extremely unhealthy to ignore what someone else is doing and talk about your own things, or to not really reflect on your role in things. But it's so hard, you know, and I think we're running out of time here, but I think that for me, acknowledging and, you know, being with the difficulty has been really beneficial, and knowing that, you know, we're all in different points in a spectrum, and some of us have, you know, teenagers plus. I don't. My kids are quite young. You know, I've worked with some older kids, but for me and for my kids, obviously the stakes feel way higher than they do for the kids at camp. And when the stakes feel super high, I think we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves. I think boundaries are fine. I mean, I think every adult sets boundaries for themselves in their own relationships, and it's okay to have boundaries for your kids as well. And yeah, so I don't know, before we wrap up, I just want to reflect on how grateful I am, by the way, just to be able to come down here and talk to people about this stuff on the level that you all are able to teach me and help me move through my own struggles and my own hang-ups and whatnot. And yeah, just grateful to see you all here again, and hope we can continue to have conversations like this throughout the week, because I would guess that probably none of us have it quite figured out all the way. So hopefully, maybe, my suspicion is we'll come back to this conference in 30 years and our kids can teach us about all the bad stuff we did, and we can really grow at that point. But in the meantime, I'm happy to slog it out with you guys. So, thanks so much for your time, and I'm happy to keep hanging out talking to people who want to. Thanks, Julie. I will be back tomorrow talking about, more of the stuff that we do at our camp and all the fun stuff that happens there and some of the approaches we try. But yeah, thanks. I'll see you guys around. Yeah, no problem. Bye. The end. See you.